Distinguished visitor from Olin College, USA, Professor Miller. And to start off the proceedings, I would ask Professor Jain to introduce the speaker and take you through the talk.
Okay, friends, you have some visitors today. Let me quickly remind you, you have met Professor Sukhatme earlier. He was the director of IIT Bombay, has been a visitor to us from time to time. I would be requesting him to come back to us again, maybe in January, February, and talk about energy. He has been very passionate about energy. We have with us Professor Paul Jennings from California Institute of Technology. I learned my earthquake engineering from him and did my PhD thesis under his supervision. So if you want to know how bad I was as a student, maybe catch him sometime. And we have today's speaker, Professor Rick Miller. Rick was in similar shoes that I became. I got into a situation a couple of years back. He became the first president, founder president of the Olin College. It is a new college that has come up about 10 years back, and has done some fantastic work in terms of re-engineering the engineering education. I heard about him from Professor Paul Jennings, and then we had been having some communications. I had a chance to visit him last month, and those 1.5 hours time I spent with him were one of the most enlightening discussions I had about engineering education, and you will see why I'm saying this. Rick has done his undergraduate studies at UC Davis, University of California Davis, masters at MIT, PhD at Caltech, has taught at University of Southern California, has been a dean at Iowa, and now is a president at Olin College. One of the very learned persons in engineering education. He's a mechanical engineering professor who has been consultant to many corporations. And so I wouldn't be very formal, and I would just go ahead and invite Rick to enlighten us with what you're doing at Olin College. Thank you.
It's a real privilege to be here. I'm just amazed that so many people would come after taking a long exam and a very long day to hear a speaker. I'm very impressed, and I'm also really privileged to be here. The Indian Institutes of Technology are, of course, a beacon throughout the world for quality and selectivity and merit. And they were quite an inspiration, actually, to this new college that we're working in Massachusetts, in that it's a meritorious institution where admission is granted only based on merit. And at least until the financial crisis very recently, students did not pay to go to Olin College. So it's very much like the IIT system in that sense. At any rate, I'm going to try to give you some background as to why this institution was created in Massachusetts and what the underlying philosophy is. And then at the end, a little bit about how the curriculum has developed, because I think there's some similar interests and themes between what Professor Jain is planning for this institution and what Olin is trying to do as well. So we have some things in common. Anyway, here is a bit of an overview of where we came from. The National Academy of Engineering, in about the year 2000, commissioned a study to look at the impact of technology in the 20th century. So what is it that engineering has done that has changed the way people live? And what they found is that there's a very proud legacy for those of us in engineering. If you look at this list, for example, electrification happened in the 1900s. The automobile, the airplane, water supply and distribution, electronics, radio, television, airplanes, spacecraft, the internet, cell phones. These are things that are technological innovations. In fact, they've changed the way people live so profoundly that few people can remember what life was like before. In fact, my kids think that God must have made the cell phone because they cannot imagine how they could have survived without a cell phone. And that's actually a definition of an innovation I'm going to return to later. An innovation is something that changes the way people live so profoundly that they can't remember what life was like before. Okay, engineering is probably better understood in India than it is in the US. there are not very many, very small percentage of only 4.5% of the BS degrees in the United States last year were awarded to people in engineering. 95% went to something else. And so when I meet with my family who are not engineers, I often refer to this book, which is a very nicely done book the National Academy put out, that explains what these 20 greatest achievements of technology in the 20th century were all about. Now, more recently, the Academy looked forward and thought about what are the engineering achievements for the 21st century? What has changed? What's going to be different? One of the things that they concluded was that in the 21st century, complexity is a much bigger issue now. The world is a smaller place. Population is going to expand. There's going to be 9 billion people on this planet before the year 2050. And there's hardly an area in life that won't be affected by that because of the competition for resources and the opportunity for conflict. In fact, cooperation across time zones, across disciplines, and across political boundaries is going to be essential to solving any of the global challenges in the 21st century. And so this complexity actually is reflected in the kinds of challenges that they see, including sustainability of the planet, health, security, and an area which we simply call the joy of living, which has to do with the effect that technology will have on the way humans experience life, moving from entertainment to reverse engineering the brain, for example. There is a series of meetings that's been taking place across the U.S. Called the National Summits on the Grand Challenges of Engineering. This is one of the flyers from the last meeting, which was at the University of Southern California. And Olin has been involved as a participant in this, along with these schools. And there's another one that's being planned, it turns out, in 2013 to be international, probably going to be in London. Where we're getting together people from different time zones and different disciplines to talk about the grand challenges of the 21st century. Now, it turns out that to do a reasonable job of preparing, educating people for dealing with these grand challenges and the complexities that they involve is quite difficult. It's not likely that using the same textbooks that we did in the 1970s to teach people in the year 2050 will make sense because of the complexity that's been increased. And in fact, one of the reasons you can see this is through what I'm going to call unintended consequences. A little tricky, this button here, sorry. Unintended consequences. A lot of the grand challenges that we're facing today can actually be traced to unintended consequences of the technologies, of the things that we invented in the 20th century. Sustainability of the climate, for example, is affected by carbon in the atmosphere, which is heavily affected by the impact that engines have on the environment, which was not considered as a primary design challenge when the engines were invented 100 years ago. So this is what I call an unintended consequence. And there are lots of others of these things as well. So to prepare the engineers for that future, they will need to be able to better anticipate unintended consequences. The way people are going to use technologies, not just whether it works. And they need to be systems architects for complex systems, and taking into account all kinds of things, even religious dimensions, because that often affects the way people use technology, or whether they will use it or not. And conceiving, creating, and managing technologies are the grand challenges. In fact, our goal, as we thought about this, was to produce engineering innovators who will make a positive difference in the world. That's the type of template that we're working with. Okay, now, education. Remember, we're a school, so we are probably not going to solve all these problems ourselves. But maybe the people that we educate will play a role in this. And it turns out if you think about the way we educate people today, the educational model that we use is actually contributing to the challenges that we have of dealing with these problems. And here's the way I would explain this. All of the education through high school, at least in the United States, students normally take courses together no matter what their ultimate career objectives will be. And they take a little bit of everything. So they have an exposure to mathematics and to natural science, but they also have an exposure to arts, to humanities, to music, to physical education, all of these things in a very general curriculum. So they have, in essence, a common experience. And then they graduate, okay? When they graduate, they go off to college. And when they go to college, they choose something to major in. They might go to one of the IITs, and they will major in engineering and science. Or they might go to one of the institutes of management, and they would study something else. Or they might go to one of the art psychology institutes. Or in the US, they might go to a very large campus like the University of Michigan, which is several miles across. And on this one campus, they could major in all of these different things. But it turns out, even if you are on one campus that has all these different majors, there's a geographical area in the campus which is called the engineering quad, where students spend almost all of their time. Okay? And that's represented by this circle here. So they will spend most of their time thinking about the world in a particular way, depending on what their major is. In fact, if you think of it, those students who are majoring in sciences and engineering will spend almost all of their time thinking about the world through the lens of feasibility. Is this a possibility based on what we know about natural law? And most of the people that they would think of as their heroes, the faculty members who stand in front of them and are the experts who explain things to them, most of them see the world through this lens of feasibility too. But on the other hand, those students who go to management institutes have a different lens. They spend most of their time worrying about, is this a viable enterprise? Does it generate more revenue than it takes? What kind of capital is required to start and what will be the long-term payback? It's about management, it's about counting, it's about getting people organized to achieve a goal. That's what they think about. And of course, if you're majoring in psychology of the arts, they look at life through a completely different set of questions. Questions which we sometimes don't pay enough attention to in sciences and engineering. Questions like, what motivates people? What is the nature of love? What is the nature of beauty? What's the nature of truth or justice? Now, those don't have numbers associated with them. They're not talking so much about physics, but they're a very important dimension to life. And they will spend most of their time thinking about that, and with the people around them, they'll be totally immersed in this cultural world. Well, one of the interesting things is if you are majoring in engineering, an accredited degree, at least in the United States, is this organization called ABET, which is the accreditation organization. I assume there's something similar to that in India. In order to make sure that all the engineering graduates are competent in their technical field, they must spend a lot of time studying very technical subjects before they get their certified degree. In the US, it's about 3/4 of the total amount of time has to be spent studying what I'm calling feasibility. Mathematics, science, engineering science. But leaving about 1/4 of the time of their total 4 years, about 1 year of the 4 years, available to learn about everything else in life. Okay? And learning even what the vocabulary is in the business world and in the desirability world. Of course, the situation is not much different in the business school. To get an AACSB accredited degree in business requires that you spend half of your time studying management, accounting, and organizational behavior, and all of those issues that business schools must present. And you want them to learn this because if they don't, they're not competent when you go to work for them. So they have about half of their time left over to study everything else, including something about feasibility and something about desirability. And of course, those other students who go off and study things in, say, arts, turns out in the US there are no uniformly accepted standards for what you need to know to be a well-educated artist, including any exposure at all to natural sciences or mathematics or to viability. I know this because I have a daughter who did this recently. She was an economics major at a very fine private university in the Boston area. And she graduated a cum laude in her field with a minor in entrepreneurship. And in 4 years, she didn't take one course in natural science. And the only course that she had in mathematics in 4 years was a statistics course. And this was as applied to her field in economics. Okay? Now this, as you might guess, this was kind of an awkward situation. We had some conversations around our dinner table which were uncomfortable at times. And she said, "But Dad, I did very well in high school. I had very good marks in the standardized tests coming out of high school, and they accepted that as evidence that I'm already educated in natural sciences and mathematics, so I don't need to take anything else." Now, think about the complexity that we're worried about in the 21st century. And those issues of global sustainability, which are going to require cooperation. I'm not sure she knows enough about natural science to have an educated opinion about whether the country should choose option A or should choose option B for dealing with these kinds of issues. And that's just a microcosm of what happens on the entire planet. So, what we've done is specialized, and we've created communication barriers between disciplines, and these are for people who are only 19 or 20 years old. Does it matter? I think it matters. For example, it's only when all three of these disciplines intersect that you have the possibility of an innovation. Remember what an innovation is? Changes the way people live so profoundly they can't remember what it was like before. I challenge you to think of a single innovation that's happened that isn't simultaneously feasible, viable, and desirable. There are lots of examples of almost innovations that haven't happened yet. For example, solar electric power on the roof of your house, technically, from a feasibility point of view, is capable of producing the electricity that you need to run your house without having to hook up to a power plant. Why hasn't it happened? It hasn't changed the way people's lives. Because it's feasible, but it's not viable. Okay? It's cheaper to buy electricity in most places in the world from these centralized power plants instead. So that's why it hasn't changed the way people live. It's also possible to have examples where things are both feasible and viable, but are not desirable. And I think this desirability thing is probably going to be very important for the 21st century. One example, well, let me tell you a simple example first. It turns out that I grew up in Southern California, even though I'm living on the other side of the country now, and so did my wife, and one of our favorite kinds of food is Mexican food. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but Mexican food, like some Indian food, is very spicy. It's terrific. So my wife and I moved to the middle of the country to a place called Iowa, which is far from Mexico and has almost no Mexican food. And we missed this very much. So we thought, why is this? These people, if they only had a restaurant that offered Mexican food, we could make a lot of money because everybody would be interested in it. So we thought about it. We know exactly what the recipe is, and we know how much you need to charge. Turns out it wouldn't work. And the reason it wouldn't work is it's not desirable. The folks who live in Iowa just don't like spicy food. Okay? It's not about feasibility. It's not about what you charge. You could give it away, and they wouldn't eat it. Okay? It's just not going to work. And some of you probably, struggling with all the things in my pocket here, to get this out, know what this is. This is an iPhone. Okay? The most successful cell phone ever made, which has almost no patents in it that deal with physics or technology, and has lots of patents associated with something else which you would have to label as desirability. This has to do with the button. in front of you all. Back this far. Okay. What Steve Jobs did best was engineer for desirability. Okay? This thing creates an emotional attachment which is not dependent on the CPU, or the rate speed of the processor, or the bandwidth. It has a look and a feel and a touch which develops an almost intuitive sense of belonging. That's the new frontier. Okay? I think that kind of engineering understanding is going to dominate in the 21st century. Which raises a lot of questions. How do you prepare engineers who understand anything about this desirability thing? But one last point on this. I have a brother who is also an engineer and lives in Silicon Valley. He's on his 4th startup company. And we talk about this a lot. And he agrees with this basic analysis. Well, this raises a question. If you wanted to create an innovation, what's the best way to go about it? Where should you start? Since it's got to have the intersection of all three, you could think of it from an engineering point of view, which we usually do as engineers. Imagine that engineers own innovation, and that anything that's innovative must originate with an engineer, right? Comes up feasibility. It turns out that's not true. Folks in the business school also think they originated innovation. They think they own it, and unless it came from an MBA, it isn't really an innovation. My brother says if you give him a choice, he would much rather start with desirability. If you come up with an idea that's inherently desirable, that's a better, shorter pathway to the innovation than either the just-in-case science or the just-in-case business. One of the reasons is if you have an idea that's inherently desirable, people care about what you're doing. They know why it's relevant, and they're calling you all the time asking whether it's done yet and how they can help. If, on the other hand, you're involved in just-in-case science and you haven't thought about whether this will make a difference in people's lives, you're always trying to convince them to invest in it. It's usually a good idea to have people interested in what you do with money in their pockets. It tends to accelerate things. So, this is a little bit of explanation of how the barriers that we have to get over in education in order to prepare innovators for the next generation. Now, one of the things that goes into this is understanding a bit about creativity and the role that it plays in innovation. The way we think about it, creativity is the process of having original ideas and insights. Inventiveness is the process of having original ideas and insights that have value. It's a slight difference. An artist can be creative. An inventor is not only creative, but also does something that has value. And innovation is the process of having original ideas and insights that have value, and then taking them to the next level to where they change the way people live, doing whatever it takes to make that happen. We began to think that we needed to know something about creativity and innovation before we can teach it. So my students actually challenged me to do something that I had been telling them to do for many years. I talked to them constantly about the importance of lifelong learning. And I explained when you graduate from college, you'll be 22 years old. You will not be an educated person. You're like entering the marathon now. You're not finishing the marathon. The rest of your life, you will continue to learn. So they said, excuse me, Dr. Miller, what have you learned since you graduated? Oops, this was a little embarrassing. So one of the things that I decided to do was I'm going to try to model what I'm asking our students to do. Very simple idea. I'll put a book in my briefcase every time I fly. A book that's a nonfiction book about a subject that's not about feasibility. Okay? Not about my comfort zone. It's not what I was trained to do. And I've done that now for several years. And you know, it works. It really changes the way you think about things. These are 10 of my favorite books. And I decided to start reading in the area of cognitive science and creativity because what I'm doing now, less engineering, I'm doing more education. So wouldn't it be a good thing to know how people learn and what it is they need to know? These are all good books, and I could talk to you an hour on each of them, but I won't, thank heavens. I will tell you though, if you have any interest, those 3 books right there are a great place to start. They will really surprise you with what you learn about the way people learn. One of the key books in this whole series is this one by Howard Gardner called Multiple Intelligences, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And to get started on this, since this is a school, I'm going to give you some homework, okay? But this is easy homework. You don't have to read. There won't be a report or any kind of problems that you have to solve. This is a matter of watching a video. This particular one is a video by Sir Ken Robinson. Has anybody here heard of Sir Ken Robinson? A few people. He was knighted in the UK for his work on creativity in education. And he's written a number of books. In fact, this second book in the series, Out of Our Minds, is a terrific explanation of creativity and what's happened in our educational system to prevent it. If you watch this video, it lasts about 20 minutes, and I believe it will change the way you think about education. Very simple. It's that profound. We'll talk just a second about this first book in the upper left-hand corner, Howard Gardner's book. Gardner is a psychologist and cognitive scientist at Harvard, who in 1983 wrote this book, Frames of Mind. What he was doing was investigating the validity of the IQ test. In those days, it was very widely believed that everybody had an IQ, an intelligence quotient. You could figure this out by taking a multiple choice test. You might as well tattoo it on your forehead, because everything that you achieved in life was determined by that number. Okay? So it was a low number. You might as well just get a job, working in the farms or digging ditches or something, because you weren't capable of doing anything more. And he was a curious guy, and he decided to ask questions. I wonder how true that is. Has anybody studied it? And when he studied it, he found out it isn't really very true. In fact, most of the data that he found showed that it didn't predict anything very well, except for one thing. It did a okay job of predicting how well you would do in the next class that you took in school. But after you graduated, it had almost no correlation with your success in life. CEOs of major corporations were not people with very high IQs. People who had very high IQs were in prison and were working in all kinds of things. Didn't do a very good job. Okay, so at the examination that he made, he discovered that actually people have multiple intelligence. They have lots of different kinds, and in fact, can map them on locations in your brain. He can determine what happens to them if you happen to be in a car accident and a certain region of the brain goes away. One of these particular intelligences, like linguistic intelligence, will disappear if the language center in your brain is suddenly damaged in an accident. You may have all the other intelligence working perfectly. And then if you look at these, they're pretty easy to map. Academic intelligence is the sort of thing that we traditionally have emphasized in higher education. Things like the standardized testing, multiple choices, map, anything that deals with symbolic representation of the world in words and numbers. That's what it amounts to. So that's what we have interpreted, we globally have interpreted higher education to mean for the last couple of hundred years. It's that symbolic representation. It's the prefrontal cortex. But there are other parts of the brain too. Artistic intelligence. Intelligence that envisions things that aren't here now and sort of playfully imagines a way to get there, which it turns out to be fundamental to every innovation, but isn't fundamental to the curriculum in most schools. To some extent, it's available in art school. Music has a completely separate circuit in your brain that works in auditory signal processing. And of course, there are these interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligences, the ability to perceive emotion in others and to react to that, or the ability to perceive how your influence is working or not working on other people. Those are fundamentally important for management. If you're going to work on a team, Don't you think it's a good idea? You'd be able to relate to the people who are there and understand how to motivate them. Very important concepts, and they're just not included in most engineering curricula, at least. Now, recently I broke my own rule in terms of reading books, and I decided to read a fiction book, highly recommended by a friend. This is a book called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by a fellow named Mark Harding. Has anybody ever heard of this book? Probably not. Maybe one. This is the story of a 12-year-old boy who's growing up in England who is autistic. You know what autism is? Yeah, this is a brain disorder where, for a variety of reasons, a person is unable to perceive emotion. They cannot recognize emotion. So, for example, if you have an autistic person and you draw one of these little circles with a smiley face, or a circle with a frowning face, the person has no idea what you mean. They can look at your face and not tell whether you're happy or sad because they can't read emotion at all. The only way they can make sense out of the world is through a sequence of linear symbols like language or numbers. Autistic people, it turns out, have a predominance, have a natural attraction to the kinds of roles in life that they can play where they only have to follow the rules very linearly from one to the next. There's actually a fair number of us in engineering and science who have a tendency towards autism, turns out. Yeah, it's a very touching story. Okay, I read this book on a plane flight back from Korea to the United States. It was an overnight flight. It's a good thing it was an overnight flight because several places in the book there were tears running down my cheeks as you were feeling the tension in this family for what it's like to live with a person who can't feel that way. That's also a little bit personal because my brother has a daughter who's a special needs child. And so we've seen some of these issues play out. The point is, this is very real. It's just as real as Newton's laws. And it's also an illustration of what Gardner was talking about in interpersonal intelligence. This is a pathology of what happens when a person is unable to sense interpersonal intelligence. And while autism is an extreme example of that, everybody lies somewhere on a spectrum, and when you're picking a team, it would be really good not to have the team leader be autistic. Okay? This multiple intelligence stuff plays a big role in what we're doing. Another type of reading that I've been doing recently is about what are we learning about education and how is education itself changing in the 21st century with the internet, with the ability for people to learn in many different ways. This particular book, A New Culture of Learning, has two authors, and one of them, John C.D. Brown, is fairly well known. Has anybody heard of John C.D. Brown? John C.D. Brown was the chief scientist at Xerox at Palo Alto Research Center when Apple Computers was spun, when the mouse for computing that you see today came out of Xerox PARC. A lot of the fundamental psychological interactions with desirability plays a key role. Came out of that laboratory. John has written a number of books now on cognition and on learning. This particular one is quite simple. It just came out in June of this year, and I highly recommend if you're a teacher, because it gives you a good quick overview. It doesn't go into a lot of depth, but it does give you a good quick overview. So he predicts that the internet is changing the way we learn. One of the things that he points out, with lots of examples in there, is the traditional way of thinking about education has been a transfer of knowledge from the teacher to the student. Okay? The new way of learning, which is actually happening, if you have kids and you watch them play with the internet, you're not transferring knowledge, they're constructing knowledge as they go. And if you think about it, this is really probably the only sustainable way to perpetuate our civilization, because every new generation has to construct a mental picture of what's happening in the world that will be useful for them during their lifetime. And this is changing very rapidly, so they need to learn how to construct. In addition to that, most of the traditional methods of education involve communicating to you a sort of can't-do attitude. You can't do that yet because you don't have the correctives. You have to finish this course, and that course, and then we'll talk about something else. So it's a lot of what we call just-in-case learning. Okay? You got to share all these 22 chapters. Trust me, someday this will probably be useful to you. On the other hand, the can-do attitude is what's very prominent in the new method of learning, in which if you have a 9-year-old kid sitting at the internet, they don't know that you're supposed to have computer science before they just do it, okay? And when it succeeds, they build a sense of self-confidence and they just try more new things. That's a spirit of can-do, which comes right out of the arts, by the way. This is the same kind of learning that goes on in the arts. Another of the more common traditional values in the educational model is follow orders. Don't color outside of the lines. Do this when I tell you to do this. It's time to stop, put the pencil down, okay? The new method of learning is not about following orders, it's about following your passions, okay? What is it that you really care about? There's nothing standing between you and the goalpost now, except how hard you want to work to learn it. You can do it. You can construct the knowledge on your own. The internet is there all the time. Just follow your passion. The old model is to learn in class. We're going to meet here tomorrow morning at 8, and then we'll be done by 10. We will have covered chapter 22. And so until tomorrow morning at 8, you don't have anything to do. And when we're done, you'll have a certain set of problems. The new model is you learn 24/7. Okay? There is no beginning, there is no finish line, and there is no beginning line. You're just constantly learning. The old model is you learn alone. The new model is you learn together in teams. In the old model, what? You talk to your friend about this? That might be cheating. Okay? You have to stop that. The new model is there's no way you can get to the answer by yourself. The things that you can do as a team could not be matched at all by individuals, no matter how bright you are, working alone. It's very, for example, when you go to a doctor now, a physician, when you're ill, they usually work in a group. And there is a group with different disciplines, and the team decides what's wrong with you. The days in which one physician knows enough about all of the different treatments and all of the different ailments to effectively treat you are gone. Teamwork is essential. That's why that interpersonal relations is so important. Finally, the leading edge in traditional education is what we're calling problem-based learning, where somebody gives you a problem and expects you to integrate across these different topics the ideas necessary, bring them to bear for something useful. Very important idea. Education is useless unless you can bring it to bear on something. The new way of thinking about this is what I call design-based learning, which goes one step beyond problem-based learning. In design-based learning, you have to define a problem first before you can solve it. So one of the things that we've thought about is problem-based learning in engineering means that you start with a set of specifications, and your job is to come up with a prototype device that meets those specifications, right? Somebody gave you the specifications. That's the problem. Then your job is to invent the thing, the circuit, or the beam, whatever, so that it meets these specifications. In design-based learning, you have to go out and interview people. You have to find out what it is they care about. What is it that doesn't exist yet that will change their lives? Then you define the problem, now that you know what needs to be designed, and then you go through the next steps of creating a prototype. And you're not done until you go back to the people. Because if there's going to be an innovation, it has to change the way people live. So it has to be desirable in the end. So it's a little bit larger circle. By the way, this isn't new. Anybody in here who has a graduate degree, particularly a PhD, knows this is pretty close to the way you earned your PhD. You constructed knowledge rather than had somebody transfer it to you. You learned how to read journals on your own. You formed your own ideas about what's important. You followed your passions, you cared about it. There wasn't a classroom structure around this at the end. You had to do whatever it takes to get this new idea developed and then published, right? It's just applying elements of this graduate pedagogy down to people who are 9 years old. And that's happening already. One of the interesting quotes from this book is, for most of the 20th century, our educational system has been built on the assumption that teaching is necessary for learning. Sounds almost obvious, doesn't it? Until you look at the way kids actually learn without a teacher. often the most important things that they learn is without a teacher. The teacher is not the person with the authority in front of the room who knows everything, who gives you all the answers. The teacher in this model is a coach, who is the person who enables you to learn, who guides you, who is wrong as much as you're wrong about different topics, but it doesn't matter because he can help you find the answers, which are right. Okay, now, that's some of the changes that we've seen in what we learned about cognitive science, about creativity. Now, let me talk a little bit about engineering curricula itself, the sorts of subjects that we learn as students. There is a series of reports, and this is one in particular I'm going to flash right through. A thesis at MIT, done in 2004, Understanding the Careers of Alumni of MIT Mechanical Engineering Department. There's a longer version of this, if you're interested in this, on the YouTube, by MIT Professor Woody Flowers, if you want to follow it. So what is this about? Well, they did a survey of MIT graduates. 676 email requests went out. They had a 46% response rate, which is pretty good. What does the survey look like? Well, I'll go to, I know you can't read this stuff, so I'll come back to that in a second. For each one of those questions, they said, where did you learn this? And these first set of numbers is, I learned this as an MIT undergraduate. So apparently the stuff on the left, they learned a lot of that. The stuff on the right, they didn't learn very much of. And then the next thing is, what did you learn in graduate school? And they said, well, you learned about that much. What did you learn on the job? That's kind of interesting. And then, what did you learn this, like somewhere else? It wasn't in school at all. And what about the stuff you didn't learn at all? You still don't know. And that's what you got from this. Now, what does this mean, in case you can't read this in the back? Well, first off, see this stuff here that's in the left, where there was, all the big purple lines from the MIT undergraduate education. This is what that is. Which is mechanical engineering. So those are core subjects in mechanical engineering. Things that are actually very dear to my heart. Mechanics of solids, fluid mechanics, thermodynamics, dynamics, and so forth. That's what they learn. Now, by the way, note that those subjects are what I call analysis subjects. They're things that apply reductionist logic. Let's take this thing apart. Let's draw a free body diagram. Let's apply the equations that we know to each of the component parts and come up with equations and describe how it works. That's what the methodology is. Now, there's this stuff in the middle, which we're calling professional skills. What is there? Well, it's all engineering reasoning, systems thinking, personal skills, and attributes. These are actually synthesis or integrative thinking. So instead of analytical, where you're breaking things apart, these are the kinds of thinking skills that you need to put things together, to integrate them, to think about the whole system. And finally, there's this stuff on the right, the how and why, which has things like enterprise and business context, market context. These are entrepreneurial thought in action. These are the skills that you need to take an idea and get people persuaded to join you and to make it actually happen. Okay, so what did we learn? Well, the MIT core, the mechanical engineering core, is something they learned at MIT. But on the other hand, if you ask them, what is it that you really need, they use this stuff in the professional skills pervasively. That's what they use versus what they actually learn. Another thing, if you ask them, well, how often do you use this? And they'll say, well, the stuff here that's shown in blue, they say, I never use that, not since I graduated. And I use this thing in red pervasively. I use this all the time. Finally, they'll ask them, how proficient does your boss expect you to be? Does your promotion depend on this? And none. Okay? I'm not only expected to be proficient, I'm expected to lead and to innovate in this area. That's how I get to be the CEO someday in this company. Okay, so the not learned, but pervasive. This is what I call the missing basics in engineering education today. Not being taught, but apparently it's very important. Teamwork, communications, These, by the way, are non-technical education. Those are the things that in most technical programs are not considered part of the technical content. The accreditation boards don't expect this to show up in any engineering curriculum. On the other hand, these are the things that we learn but are seldom used. This is the technical content. And those are the things that I remember being responsible for as an engineering student. Okay, so some surprising outcomes here from MIT. This is not just based on an MIT study. The National Academy published a book called Educating the Engineer 2020, a panel across the United States. They came back with what they considered to be the missing basics of an engineering education. What do you think they are? Teamwork, communication, creativity, leadership, entrepreneurial thinking, and so on. So those things have to be fit into the education if you want to prepare people for the 21st century. Okay, leads us to an interesting question. What is an engineer? This is an interesting question because it depends on who you ask. From my background, I believe I was prepared as an applied scientist. That's actually what my courses were about. And what I learned how to do was to publish papers in journals about science applied to problems that engineers cared about. Okay, that's what I actually did the engineering thing. I just wrote about them. Sort of like a musicologist. You know what a musicologist is? It's a person who can tell you all kinds of details about how Beethoven grew up, but actually doesn't play the piano. Okay, that's the way my education prepared me for this. That's what I do, and there's a need for them. Don't let me downplay this. It's very important that you know applied science if you're going to be an engineer. It's not about replacing that. It's about supplementing. If you look at the dictionary, what is an engineer? It says a person who carries through an enterprise by skillful or artful contrivance. Where's the word science? Interesting. If you talk to people in the accreditation boards, they'll tell you it's a designer or an architect of a system, process, or device. That's what it is. That's the accreditation board. If you talk to people in industry, they'll often tell you an engineer is a project or a team leader. It's a person who I rely on to get this done. They know enough about the science to figure it out or to hire somebody to do the detail, but they're the ones who make sure that the car runs when you put the key in it. Or when you buckle up, when you get in the plane, you don't get killed because the plane fell apart. That's the person who we do. One of my favorite definitions is by actually a literature professor at neighboring Wellesley College who says, to engineer is to make. To engineer is to make. Okay? Comes from the same root as art. You get the image of a sculptor who has clay and an image in their head, and through interaction with this medium, over time they shape an image in clay which you've never seen before. Okay? To engineer is to make. The definition that we have adopted in Olin is an engineer is a person who envisions what has never been and does whatever it takes to make it happen. Okay? Where's the word science? What does this mean? It starts with vision. If you can't envision what's never been, you'll never make it. Okay, you have to have vision. Maybe it's not a bad thing to spend some of our time cultivating creativity. When you look at admissions to college in engineering, I'm sure it's true with the IITs, it's true in most of the US, what counts most? What did you get in your math and physics scores in high school, right? Are you sure we're asking the right questions? What if you're a highly creative individual who's very persuasive, envisions what has never been, and did whatever it takes to make it happen, but your SAT score was a little bit lower than the next person? You probably won't get into engineering school today. Okay. Maybe we need to even think about who it is we invite into the profession of engineering if we want this kind of result. By the way, I mentioned Steve Jobs a while ago. Do you know what major Steve had in college? Trick question, right? Steve didn't graduate from college. He's one of those kids who realized you don't need to have a teacher in order to learn. Okay? One more thought on this before we move on. Engineering versus science. Are they the same thing? they're often confused, and I think they're not. For example, engineering always begins with a question. There must be a better way than this. This is just annoying that it's so slow or it's so ineffective. And so after looking at the situation, you come up with an idea. Well, why not X? An idea. And from that, if you're a real engineer, you try it. You don't build one. Don't write a PhD thesis on it first. Build it. See if it works. And from the prototype, you test it. If you are an engineer, you know it almost never works. Not the first time. It always fails. You observe why it fails, and you say, there must be a better way. And then this cycle just continues over and over through this loop. Okay? It's the process of engineering to go through this loop repetitively, and that's how real innovations are created. In fact, engineering is a process. It's not a body of knowledge. Okay, well, I should more correctly say it's not just a body of knowledge. You do need to know something about thermodynamics, about mechanics, about applied math, and so forth. But you can know all of those things about thermodynamics and applied math, and if you don't know how to bring them together and envision what has never been and make it happen, you're not an engineer. Okay? It's a process. And do we teach the process of engineering? We've reduced it to all of its component parts, but when do we put it back together? Very important. By the way, science also has a cycle. It's not exactly the same. It begins with an observation. Did you see that? Wow. Well, maybe it's because you go with a hypothesis. Well, if that hypothesis is true, then you should see X. Let's test it. And when you do the test, well, can you conclude anything? What else did you see? And you keep cycling through, and you generate new knowledge this way. It's a process. It's not a body of knowledge. It's not a collection of static facts, which to us in the U.S. is one of the most frustrating things about our K-12 education system. The teachers of science teach it as a static body of facts where kids are expected to memorize things, and it's very hard to be excited about memorizing things. Okay? But if you're actually discovering them, you're creating them yourself, it's a whole different world. It's like a mystery story. Every new question that comes up. So, the Olin Foundation in 1997 decided to spend $500 million to start over in higher education to try and fix this. Okay? There's a lot of frustration about the way engineers are created. So, let's do something about it. They had very strong ideas of what's wrong. Excuse me. They concluded that you couldn't fix this problem by giving the money to any existing school and just having them do more of what they've been doing. It wouldn't change. They needed to start over. And the reason was they needed to change the culture in higher education. So to make sure we got it right, they said you will not have tenure, you'll have no departments, students won't pay tuition, and everything will be involved with a process of continuous improvement. So what does that mean? In our environment, it means everything has an expiration date. Okay? So none of us has tenure, and nothing at Olin has tenure. So don't fall in love with it. Okay? Even the curriculum, every 7 years, expires. And it needs to be reinvented because knowledge is changing. Now, it doesn't mean that everything is thrown out. Some things you still need to know. But you need to be willing to review it from the bottom up. That's the idea. The founding precepts of the college say we're to become an important and constant contributor to the advancement of engineering education in America and throughout the world, and that's why I'm here today. I'm so excited that IIT in Gandhinagar is starting fresh and thinking in a new way about engineering education in India. The potential that you have to change not just the education of graduates here in this college, but to have an influence on engineering graduates throughout this country is enormous. And it's rare. It's very much easier to do that by starting with a blank sheet than it is to start with a very well-established institution and to convince people to stop doing what they've always been doing and try something new. So this is an enormous privilege that you have. Well, I know from experience, having been the first employee at Olin, very much like Dr. Jane, it's an overwhelming task to build an institution. It isn't just about the curriculum. turns out. You have to have people, too. You have to have a leadership team. You need money. Governance is actually an important thing. You need a building, someplace to meet. You need faculty and staff, students, public image, academic partnerships, neighbors matter. Oh, by the way, you do need an academic program. You need to have a curriculum. Government relations are important. Accreditation, marketing is just all this stuff. And on the first day you go to work, it's like just one person, and you have all these things to do. Everybody has great advice, and there's nobody to delegate it to. So it has its own set of challenges along the way. I've come up with, and I've already talked with Dr. Jane about this, I think this is a way of thinking about getting a project done like this. It's a matter of making decisions. And I think in the first, I'm going to say, first 4 years of Olin College, we made 100,000 decisions. That's a rough estimate. Every one of those decisions has profound implications for what will happen later. None of them could have been made based on a PhD thesis or a thorough study. You don't have the luxury of having data or having experience, because you have to be made largely on your intuition and on your best advice that you can get. Every one of those decisions involves at least 3 things simultaneously. The decision will affect the quality or the performance. It will have a certain price tag associated with it. To choose A rather than B will cost you something different. And it will also affect the speed with which you can get the whole project up and running. Okay? And if you want the best possible outcome, you will make sure that the largest percentage of your decisions are driven by quality and not driven by cost or by speed. Now that's a very easy thing to say. It turns out that it's impossible to meet in a high percentage of the time. One of the things that I've realized along the way is that there's sort of a line across this triangle, and those things that are driven by decisions below the line are things which make the leader look like they're a good manager. Okay? I said I would only spend $100. Okay? When you got to the end, by golly, I only spent $99. I must be really good. I said it would be open on September 1st. And you got to August 31st, and you're open. So you can put a big check in that box as a good manager. Okay? In my view, 10 years from now, no one will remember if you spent $102 or $93. No one will remember if it opened on October 15th or on July 1st. Everyone will remember what the quality was. Okay? And in fact, you can't change the quality. Very difficult to change the brand that you have for quality 10 years down the road. So if you start out as a mediocre institution and then you decide 10 years later, you know, next Monday we're going to become excellent. It doesn't work. Okay? You try to bring the Nobel Prize winner here and persuade them, you know, you should join us because we have a vision, we're going to be excellent. And they're going to look around and say, I don't see too many people like me. I don't think I'm going to come. I'm going to go to the place where there are lots of people like me. So you have the chance to attract people you want now. This will be the template for the future. And the challenge is to get away with it, okay? Because you're going to have to let slip some of the measurement of being a manager along the way in order to achieve the vision. Simple strategies that we use at Olin, truly student-centered, not faculty-centered at Olin. One of my heroes in the Boston area, some of you may have heard of, a fellow named Dev Deshpande in India. He founded the Deshpande Center for Technology, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship at MIT. And recently, when speaking at a conference, he mentioned, I'll take the A team with a B idea over the B team with an A idea every time. What do you think he was talking about? Quality of people, right? What is it that education does? Does it make a product? No, it provides a service. Every academic institution, without exception, is determined by the quality of the people it has. Okay? Exceptional universities are always about exceptional people. So that's more important than the ideas. Okay? Get the right people. That's the key. Next, at Olin, we decided we needed to have some common understanding, some common vocabulary. So even now, I meet with every new faculty member and their spouse for dinner within a few weeks of they arrive, and I give them 3 books, okay? Because these are the 3 books that we read 10 years ago when the school was in early formation. And they're an interesting set of books, a little bit eclectic, actually. This one by Jim Collins called Built to Last. Anybody heard of Built to Last? Probably a few. Maybe you've heard of his successor book called Good to Great. Not many. He's a management guru from Stanford, okay? And he's written a lot of books about what it takes to exceed expectations based on some research in companies. So we like this because Built to Last is a story of all of the companies on the New York Stock Exchange that lasted more than 100 years and then outperformed their competitors in the same industry by at least a standard deviation over a 15-year period. Okay, so they had to transfer through CEOs and through board chairmen and through ups and downs in the economy. What he found, the common denominator for all these exceptional companies, very simple: core values. They all have a set of core values that they really care about. And that's one of the things I'm thrilled about here at IIT. You have this wonderful set of core values that's out there already. And if they're authentic, if people really believe in them, and if you actually use them, this can provide the rudder, the foundation for a long trajectory of success. The book by Tom Kelly, I don't know if you know who Tom Kelly is. His brother is the founder of a company called IDEO, which is a spin-off from Stanford and Silicon Valley. It's where a lot of the technology companies are coming out these days. And this book is about what it's necessary to create an environment where creative and innovative people will thrive. And the final book by Stephen Covey, really pretty easy read, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is about teamwork. What does it take to earn the trust of the people around you? Very basic read. Finally, we concluded from all this, our job 1 is core values. We have 5 simple core values at Olin. They're used on our 360 evaluations for everybody in the leadership team every year. Our students have to sign a pledge to the core values as a condition for admission to the school. There's a student honor board that adjudicates all complaints about violations of the core values. And if a student is found in violation by their peers, they can lose their scholarship and be expelled from the institution. And it winds up that almost never happens because they're so serious about these core values. The student, protect the students from themselves because they are sometimes a little unforgiving. After all, they're only 18 years old when they get there. Sometimes people do make mistakes, but it really does work. Finally, the last minute or two, what is Olin College? Okay, well, it's an undergraduate residential engineering school. Why doesn't it have MS and PhDs? Well, because the foundation felt that the biggest problem with engineering education is not at the PhD level. That's actually working pretty well. What they're doing at Caltech and at MIT and Berkeley and these other schools is really quite good. It's before you get there that we're having so much trouble, not having the right basics in the educational program and a large dropout rate. And I'll let you read the rest of this. It's not a very big school. We're intended to be a test tube, not a factory. We're supposed to try new ideas. That's what the school looks like. Actually, this is what it looked like last month before all the leaves fell off the trees. It's now barren because it's December, just about. This is where it's located, near Boston, which is way up there. And this is where our students come from. Okay? Interesting thing, somewhat of a surprise. More of our students come from California than anywhere else. The next largest bunch appears to come, well, we now have some from Massachusetts, but from Texas, from Illinois, and Virginia. They're all over. There are about 50% women, by the way. So, in fact, our entering class last fall was 54% women, and we only offer BS degrees in engineering. 40% or between 35 and 40% of our faculty are women also. So it's a very unusual environment. Here for the 3 circles, presents a little bit of a challenge. How do you teach about viability and desirability if you're in engineering school? And the way we go about this is by using our partners adjacent to us. We're across the street, literally, from Babson College. I don't know if anybody's heard of Babson College. Probably not. It's a business school. If you read the U.S. News and World Report, you will find that the ranking of schools about business and entrepreneurship, Babson College is always ranked #1. They've been ranked #1 in every U.S. News survey since the ranking started. Now the Financial Times in London is doing the same thing too. They specialize in entrepreneurship. In fact, Owen's location across the street from Babson is not an accident. They put us there deliberately because they wanted to mix the DNA of the engineering students with these entrepreneurial business students. And finally, Wellesley College, which is a women's liberal arts school about 2 miles away. Probably haven't heard of Wellesley either. Wellesley is the school that Hillary Clinton went to. It's also the school that Madeleine Albright, a former U.S. Secretary of State, went to as well. It's not an engineering school. It's not a business school. It's a liberal arts school. And this is where our kids take most of their political science and humanities and all of that. Features in the curriculum. I won't go through this in enormous detail because I don't think it's that important. Nobody gets in without going through interviews, an entire weekend of interviews. We're looking for multiple intelligences. You have to work in teams. They have an extensive design core. We put the engineering process back in the center of the curriculum, and the applied science is in the periphery, so it sort of reverses the role as traditional. Students work on about 10 projects as a team before they graduate. This ends in a senior project, which is sponsored at $50,000 per student project by corporations. They have, at the end of every semester, every student has to stand and deliver in front of the entire community. Even the freshman has only been there for 4 months. And we invite about 100 visitors from industry there who evaluates them. So by the time they've graduated, they've all done that 8 times. If you did nothing else but made students stand in front of a class and talk publicly with evaluation 8 times, you would probably change the way they begin forever. Most kids will tell you they would rather die than be involved in public speaking. So it's a transformational experience. They have to learn something that they don't know anything about, self-study. They have to have no prerequisites. They have to define a question, like a research problem, that they want to know something about. And then they have to chart a path to get there, write a miniature thesis, and get some expert to validate that it's correct. So that's our step towards learning how to learn. They also have to start and run a business or a nonprofit enterprise before they graduate. It's a graduate student project. So that's part of the curriculum. But you know, at the end, the curriculum isn't important. It's the culture that matters. It's the sense of excitement the students have when they show up every Monday. Reflecting on it, some good things and some things that I'm worried about. One of the real interesting things, we already have a growing resistance to change. We're only 10 years old. Okay? How can that be? One of those ideas that we had earlier, there's no more powerful force for conservatism than having something to conserve. Okay? 10 years ago, we were a blank sheet of paper. We had nothing to conserve. People were willing to consider anything. Today, we have some things that we think really are working. And so people are unwilling to pry their white knuckles off the steering wheel. Okay? Don't you dare suggest that we stop doing this, because this is who we are. Okay? What if we got to be #1 in the country? How hard would it be to change then? Okay? There's no place to go but down. So no one would want to change. So resistance to change is already showing up after only 10 years. The last thing I'll say, is it working? The best evidence I have for that is produced by something that's called the NSSE scores, NSSE, National Survey for Student Engagement. It's done out of Indiana University every year. About 500 universities, over 500,000 students involved. It's a series of questions designed by education schools to measure the degree to which students actually learn. Not what you teach them, but what did they learn. Okay? So results for Olin are very good. Okay? Olin is this blue bar. And this is measured, there's 1 standard deviation above the mean. Okay? And so Olin is the blue. Yellow is a group of comparison, very selective private engineering schools. And as you can see, they do in general above the mean. The mean, by the way, is 0 in this graph. The green bars are liberal arts colleges, like Wellesley College, where Hillary Clinton went. And you can see how they do. And the red bar is the average for all 500 universities. My claim is, if IIT can create an environment with any curriculum where your students are so engaged in their learning, they're so passionate, and they're empowered, and they learn 24/7, and they learn in teams, and they want to know, they want to get a PhD, you've succeeded. Okay? At that point, you've lit a fire, and the fire will take the students for the rest of their life. And that's my last slide. So if anybody is still awake and not dying of hunger, I would be glad to answer a question. In the back.
You talked about education as a service. I see that Olin College is also a very small college as compared to many universities in the US. How do you look at expanding Olin College or creating more of such universities? Because in the end, it is the mass population that is educated in the same way. But you again talked about having the brightest of students in Olin College and not having average student becoming the brightest after he passes out of Olin College. So how do you take care of those students who did not have the opportunity before they're in the high school to be that brilliant, or having those opportunities which will make them brilliant and make them brilliant after they pass out from Olin College or any rest?
Very good set of questions. Are you a student here? See, you have terrific students already. Very good set of questions. Number one, Olin is $500 million is not enough money to change all of higher education. What we hope to do is to build a test tube, which is kind of like a national laboratory for experimenting with the way people learn science and engineering, and find some methods that work and some methods that don't, and give them away. So last year, the way to answer your question about making a difference, we have a goal now to influence 10,000 engineering students in the next 5 years. Not because they all went to Olin College, but because we have a program for teaching faculty members at other universities. We've been visited by more than 100 universities in the last years. Our curriculum has been adopted by 9 other universities now, including, for example, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which this fall has adopted a program where all 1,500 incoming freshmen are taking courses that were modeled on 3 of the courses that we're doing at Olin. Again, it's not about the Olin curriculum, it's about this culture change, the change in the relationship between faculty and students, where students are empowered and learn more like graduate students do. So I'm not sure I answered all your about really smart students. We have the same disease that the IITs do. We're working with very bright people, okay? But if you want to create change, I believe that, for example, if Harvard tries a new method, more people are likely to read about it and to try it, because after all, it's Harvard and they could do whatever they want. So they must have already done the homework to find out what the best method is. So Olin needs to have a reputation for being the best if it hopes that anyone else will pay attention. Okay? And by the way, these methods work with a very different kind of student. A few miles, 50 miles south of Boston is the town of Providence, Rhode Island. There is a school there called the Big Picture School. It's an alternative set of high schools. In fact, there are 60 of them around the U.S. now that work with kids in the inner city that would normally not graduate from high school. And they've adopted essentially a project-based learning and a set of teamwork skills and entrepreneurial thought and action, which has transformed all 60 of those schools. So even though they didn't have high test scores and they're not going to be scientists and engineers, these methods have made over 90% of those kids graduate from high school. So I believe the methods that we're working with do work and are not completely dependent on the student population that we have. I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions, but I got to start. Anyone else? Any questions left? Yes.
Yeah, I will start here. I just have one small question. Actually, whatever presentation you have given about Olin sounds to be a very innovative and innovating in the area of education, basically the engineering education. And my question comes from here itself. like with a small intake, as he said, like the brilliant chunk you are taking, and you are trying to groom them who are already brilliant, firstly. And secondly, when I am thinking, my question is, what is the philosophy behind the birth of such an institution when there are so many engineering and other academia are existing the world over? Do you think that this is going to bring a revolutionary change in the field of education, or it's just an experiment?
Well, we would love to think it would create a revolution. I think that may be unrealistic. Our hope is that it will have an influence, that it will inspire other people, like, for example, faculty and staff at the IIT in Gandhinagar, to think hard about the opportunities that we face, and to try some experiments here that you might not have had the courage to try if you hadn't seen someone else actually trying to do the same kind of thing. So we hope to have an influence through inspiration. And the philosophy behind the whole school was that change is very slow to happen in higher education. In fact, it's amazing how difficult it is to get educational institutions to try anything new. The contrast that I like to use is one which is the difference between what happens in a corporation on the one hand and what happens in higher education when it comes to new ideas. If I went to Apple computers, where they make these things, I would go to a front door and a receptionist who would make me sign in my name, okay? I would probably have to leave my cameras and my cell phones. I would have a special tag on my shirt that says I'm a visitor and I have to be escorted, and they would know exactly when I went in and exactly when I went out. Why is that? It's fundamentally because corporations are afraid of corporate espionage. They know that if this thing reaches the market in September, probably by October, one from Samsung is going to come out, just about the same, right? They're worried because in the industry, people are willing to take ideas and to run with them. If I go to Harvard tomorrow, I don't have to sign in. Nobody knows I'm there. They don't care that I'm there. In fact, I could be there for the specific purpose of trying to steal their best ideas in teaching. In fact, they could give me their best ideas in a book, and I could bring it home and leave it with the faculty, and nobody would look at it. It's frustrating. So the best that Olin can do is to be an exemplar, be somebody who's willing to try new things, to try to inspire other people. And we do host these workshops for groups of dozens of faculty members from all over that come. We would be delighted if there was some from the IITs that were interested. It's not so much to learn what Olin does as it is to meet people from all around the world who are doing similar things, and you build a community. Yes?
Good evening, sir. You have shown a slide which shows the analysis of the skills that MIT undergrads use when they are in the job and what they learn.
Yeah.
Is a similar analysis available for people who are in research or pursuing academic careers? And do you see a change in this analysis? Because if MIT believes that they should teach certain subjects, there is a reason for that, and it is because it has been successful in the past. And to suddenly change the curriculum and introduce certain new subjects, just because people are going into jobs and not going into academic careers, what kind of or will you say that you will build two curriculums for people who are going into jobs and people who are going into academic careers? So, I just want to contrast between that slide and people who want to go into research careers.
That's a very good question. I'm not sure everybody can hear it. The question was about the slide which shows the data from MIT's alumni survey, which demonstrates that the students are reporting that they use some material and they don't use others. And the question is that slide really biased towards graduates who just went to work for companies? And would the slide look very different if you talked to students who went on to graduate work? Okay? As far as I know, that slide includes both those who went to graduate work and those who also went to work for a company. And at MIT, I believe about 40%, 45% of their graduates go on to do graduate work. So I don't have the breakdown that you're looking for. And I would expect the same kind of thing to show up. And that's one of the reasons why that data is so interesting. I'm not as far as I know, in fact, I was just at MIT a couple weeks ago, and they're thinking about trying to develop a new kind of curriculum there too, and they're not certain that the faculty will be willing to accept it. Similar kinds of concerns. And it's not obvious that every change is a good one, right? People in the academic world have to decide, are Newton's laws now obsolete? We shouldn't teach that anymore? Or not? Okay, it's a big responsibility. So there's room, though, for someplace on the planet for people to break all the rules and to try new things and just see what happens. One of the things that happened at Olin was that our students began to believe that they were not really well prepared for engineering because we didn't take as many of those technical elective courses as they did at MIT. This began to be a real problem because they become, they talk among themselves and they become so convinced there's no way they could be competitive at this, so they would hesitate to apply for certain jobs because they thought they would never be successful, or they shouldn't go on for graduate school. Turns out we have a little bit of data now, and I think that's a completely false set of assumptions. For example, that the school is small enough that my wife and I get to know every student because we invite them to our house in groups of about 10 for dinner every year. So by the time they graduate, we've had them all 4 times. So that means about 35 dinners at our house every year. They're really fun. And what we find out, the first graduating class, that graduated in 2006, for example, the first kid to complete a PhD was Michael Curtis, who graduated in atomic physics from Oxford University in 2009. The next kid was Julie Connolly, who got her PhD in mathematics from Columbia, and she's now an assistant professor at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. And the third one was Kian Nguyen, a little Vietnamese girl, who only weighs about 100 pounds when she's wet, who just finished her PhD in material science at Berkeley, and she's working for a startup company there. And there are 4 of them that are just finishing their PhDs at Stanford now. So if there is something that you lose from this preparation, it's hard to find it in the data. It may be there, but we haven't seen it yet. Still an experiment in progress. We don't know what the answer is. Maybe one more question? Okay.
Because I'm not from IIT, I'm from Nirma University, so by fault I'm here. So, and the director was very previous directors, now I'm at the line. So, I'm a genetic engineer, not engineer. So, there is one important issue of quality of faculty. It's a little bit dicey, particularly for the head of the institute to decide which is the best faculty that you are going to hire. Most often in the science institute, in research institute, our main criteria is to look at the publication record, whether that person can give a good speech, and whether he has the good experience in teaching or not, but at least if these 2 criteria are fulfilled, then we say, oh, this is a good candidate. But that may not always reflected in terms of performance over the years. But once you have taken a decision, you have recruited a faculty, you don't want to throw out, and that is not the way we Indians actually think. So how do you, what is the criteria in this scenario?
How do you recruit faculty?
Right. That could be a long topic, so let me try to be brief about this. The question was, how do we recognize excellent faculty members, and how do we go about bringing them to our school and helping them succeed? Excellent faculty depends on what you want them to do. Okay? Excellent for what? And Olin is an undergraduate education institution, right? So our primary criteria is that every faculty member should be an inspirational teacher of undergraduates in engineering. They must, but to do that, you can only teach what you know, right? And engineering is a field that moves very quickly. So you can't do that without having a role in research at the same time. Not the same role as a faculty member, say, at MIT might, whose job it is to be the first to win the Nobel Prize in something. Olin's job is to prepare the next students who are going to go off and win the Nobel Prize in something, or the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or one of those. So it's a different role. We don't offer tenure. We don't have a PhD program, so if you want to win the Nobel Prize, it's going to be a very difficult thing to do at Olin, okay? So my first concern was, would anybody come? Will any faculty, maybe we'll get some people from industry who be retired. Turns out we've had about 140 applications for every faculty appointment that we've made so far. They're really good faculty. Their biographies are all up on our website, so if you're interested in this, you can go and check. I think we have one of the highest percentages of faculty members with PhDs from the top 10 institution in their discipline at any undergraduate school that you'll find. Just to give you a little indication of the kinds of faculty members that we've attracted, one of them, because of this multiple intelligences thing, we recruited a woman named Diana Dabby to teach electrical engineering. Oh, and she also has an appointment in music. Now, Olin doesn't offer any degrees in music, but this is because Diana started life as a concert pianist. So she had been performing in New York as a concert pianist for a long period. In fact, has recorded a number of CDs. She's toured Europe and Asia, and she became interested in electronic music mid-career. She went back to school, got a PhD in electrical engineering from MIT. Her thesis advisor was Amar Bose. You know about Bose speakers and headphones? That's her PhD advisor. She had applied chaos theory to the design of musical scores, mixing Gershwin and Bach, for example, which is one of the things that she did. When we found her, we said, I don't know what we'll do with somebody like that, but she certainly has multiple intelligences. And we brought her in. She brought us to another person, Helen Donis Keller. Helen is a professor of biology and art. She is a medical faculty member from Washington University in St. Louis. She was involved in the Human Genome Project and thyroid cancer. She, in fact, has one of the top 5% NIH researchers in the field. She became interested in visual arts and resigned from her appointment. She got tired of managing a big team of researchers running after R1 grants for the National Institutes of Health every year. And she did a Master's of Fine Arts in painting from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And she has a series of paintings that are now making their way around the world to the museums. She teaches courses called Seeing and Hearing and Reflective Drawing, because we believe it starts with envisioning what has never been and then doing whatever it takes to make it happen. You have to be able to envision it. So she teaches visualization and drawing. She also teaches biological science in the first, which is a requirement at Olin for all graduates, and they do gene splicing in the first year. So she does an awful lot of application of genetic engineering to mostly bacteria that they can deal with in their course. Steve Pope, who's a professor of physics, was the director of space sciences at NASA Goddard Research Center in Maryland before he came to Olin. They had 700 people reporting to him. But these are people who are passionate about kids. The way we recruit them, they have to come and give us a talk about their research, just like every school does. That's actually pretty easy, because they're the world's expert in this one thing, right? And they can give the same talk at lots of universities, so it gets better as they give the talk more. But what we also do is that we make them teach a course in the field. So if we're going to interview Steve Holt to be a physicist at Olin, we assign him to teach a course in physics the same day that he's there interviewing. And then we enlist the students in the course as part of the selection committee. And we ask the students to vote on the faculty member, do we think this person has the capability to be an inspirational teacher at Olin College? If the students say yes, we hire them. If the students say no, we don't. Sometimes that's embarrassing. Okay? We get some faculty members who are very famous and they don't make it. They're not inspirational teachers. So that's basically what we do. Oh, by the way, in 10 years, we have lost, I think, about 5 faculty members. We have a total faculty of about 40. So that's a turnover rate of about 10% in 10 years, which I think is lower than the turnover rate was at other schools that I was at. And so even though we don't have tenure, it doesn't mean that we dismiss them. all the way. Our vision is that they will stay as long as they want. We do lose them occasionally. One of them went back to MIT, and another one is apparently going to Delft Institute in Holland this fall. Okay? Thank you very much.
Some of the students may not have understood when he said faculty doesn't get tenure. Okay, what tenure in United States means is that you are now employed for life, right? So in the US, the judges and the professors are supposed to be able to speak the truth, and therefore they are allowed job guarantee. And All-in College started with an assumption that nobody needs to be given tenure. In fact, my impression is that Rick was a tenured professor at Iowa, and today he is not tenured, which means today, if All-in College decides to let him go, he has nothing to back him up. So All-in College decided nobody will get a tenure, which means nobody will come to the students may not.
My wife thinks that this is my midlife crisis.
Okay, so thank you very much, Rick. It was an absolutely enlightening discussion. The presentation and then the questions and the answers. Rick will be here for 2 more days. We will have a lot of intense discussions with him. But still, if there are some students interested, I will see if I can have him spend a few minutes with students. Okay. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. To do the honors and give him a small little memento for his talk. Thank you very much.